Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. Today's video is going to be about the big breaking news tonight coming from Bayern Munich. The German club have sacked their manager, Julian Naglesmann, and have replaced him with the former Borussia Dortmund, PSG and Chelsea manager, Thomas Tuchel. In this massive breaking news, this somewhat strange and bizarre breaking news, to some it may seem, this is happening right now with the German club, and we're going to be talking all about it. We're going to be talking Julian Naglesmann, we're going to be talking Thomas Tuchel and Bayern Munich and everything else in between. But before we go any further, I would like to remind you all to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things are always and forever be greatly appreciated. But for now, let's talk this big breaking news tonight. The breaking news broke from Fabrizio Romano saying that Bayern Munich were in discussions about the future of one Julian Naglesmann as the manager of Bayern Munich. Of course, Nagelsmann became the youngest Bayern Munich manager of all time when he signed as the manager in 2021, in the summer of 2021. He has spent a year and a half there, or just over a year and a half now, it would seem, as the manager of Bayern Munich. He has won them a Bundesliga title, of course, but it seems that that journey is over as of right now because he is sacked. Bayern Munich have decided to get rid of him and appoint Thomas Tuchel. Now, to some, this may have seemed like it came out of the blue, and to many, I guess it seemed it has. I wasn't even fully aware that this would even be a possibility before the news broke of Fabrizio Romano today. And it seems a bit strange because I don't really necessarily think he's put a foot wrong. I don't really think Nagelsmann's really put a foot wrong. I just think it's about timing, it's about experience. But at the same time, in saying that, it does seem a bit strange because obviously when Nagelsmann was appointed, the whole idea is that he's a very young manager with a lot of time on his hands, but he was very highly rated. He seemingly had a very high ceiling, high potential to be one of the best managers in the game. And obviously he was rising through the ranks of the Bundesliga, as you kind of do as a young German manager, which is you go from a smaller German club in, like, say, in his case, Hoffenheim, and you work your way up, and he worked his way up to RB Leipzig, and he starts to make even more of a name for himself at Leipzig, and then he got the big move to Bayern. Now, maybe in hindsight, you might say that maybe it was seen as a bit rushed. Maybe it was seen as a big opportunity that came a bit too soon. Maybe the timing was a little bit off, and that's why this has kind of happened. But you would have expected Bayern to know that. This was meant to be seen as a big project because obviously he was a young manager. He was meant to slightly change Bayern somewhat, make them a bit more fresh, a bit more interesting, a bit more exciting, and especially on a European stage. Because let's face it, Bayern pretty much win the Bundesliga title every year. Maybe one or two exceptions, particularly beyond this past decade or so. But the German Cup is very similar. May not, again, be always in Bayern Munich's favour, but necessarily that is Bayern's to lose, essentially. It's more so the Champions League. They are kind of like PSG in that respect, in terms of the main guideline of focus, or the main guideline of success, or the yardstick and the measuring stick of success at Bayern Munich is the Champions League. That is seen as the massive one, the big one, because although the Bundesliga can be quite competitive with Borussia Dortmund in there and maybe one or two other names that may make it competitive for at least half a season, Bayern tend to have the legs more over the rest of them teams to go on and win it by the end of the campaign. Henceforth, this season, where Bayern find themselves second in the table, 1 point behind Borussia Dortmund. But if you are a betting man, you would probably suggest that Bayern would go on to win the Bundesliga title from this position, with or without Julian Nagelsmann. But it might be a bit more competitive this season because I think Bayern are going for a little bit of transition in terms of that aspect. I think they're lacking the goals of Robert Lewandowski, for example. Sadio Mane hasn't quite kicked on the way that I think many Bayern fans would have hoped, and I think a lot of that is down to his injury, not necessarily him. But in terms of Nagelsmann and what he brought to the table, that was obviously going to be the big thing as to how this kind of long-term kind of picture and project was going to work with a younger manager at the helm, and the youngest manager in Bayern history at that. I don't necessarily think he's put a foot wrong. I think if you could argue something, it would probably be last year's Champions League, where they got knocked out of the quarterfinal stages by a Villarreal side. That could be seen as a bit of a low point in that short-term Bayern Munich career, because that was a game that obviously Bayern were expected to win. Bayern were expected to go through to the semi-final stages, and it was the underdog in that aspect of Villarreal that actually went on to do so. So I guess you could pinpoint that as a bit of a low moment, but other than that, I don't necessarily think he's put a massive foot wrong. He, of course, won the Bundesliga title, as he's expected to do, as the top-tier manager in the top-tier club at that time. And I guess you'd just say, it's just poor timing, unfortunately for him. I think it's a case of a parallel being drawn between when Bayern snapped him up to when now that Bayern have snapped Thomas Tuchel up. You look at, obviously, the way that they snapped Nagelsmann up, and obviously Nagelsmann at that time was building up a reputation for himself. He'd gone to Hoffenheim and built himself up, to then go on to RB Leipzig and build himself up even more. He built himself up more on a European stage when obviously Leipzig entered the Champions League. Had a great couple of seasons in that competition where they, of course, gained more of the spotlight, more notoriety, and that is where obviously people started to take full note and full awareness of this club and that manager. And of course, Bayern then snapped him up. Bayern saw him as the future. Bayern saw him as someone that they could probably build some sort of dynasty with. And so they had this kind of long-term idea and long-term project in mind, with him being the vocal point as the manager. I guess you'd just say that maybe over time it might not have worked out the best way that they planned. Maybe something has gone off behind the scenes that hasn't exactly panned out the way that they would have expected. Because obviously now with Thomas Tuchel coming in, it's again another case of timing, and snapping him up early, because there were reports that Thomas Tuchel was being linked and being shown a lot of interest in by other clubs. Allegedly, he rejected Tottenham to join Bayern Munich, and let's face it, who wouldn't? But allegedly, there was apparently a contract or some sort of discussion that took place that was on the table between Tottenham and him. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation surrounding Antonio Conte right now. So of course, Tottenham naturally will be looking for his replacement almost right off the bat and immediately. And I think Thomas Tuchel being free and available and having obviously Premier League experience fit the bill in that aspect. But of course, when a bigger club like Bayern comes along, I don't think really you can turn that down. And that's obviously what has happened here. He clearly hasn't turned it down. There was also talk about maybe Real Madrid considering Carlo Ancelotti's future. But I guess for Tuchel, it was more a case of this is in the here and now. Real Madrid might be in the future, but obviously that could change, and there could be another manager waiting in the wings to obviously take that job. This is the here and now, so he's took that job at Bayern Munich. And I think for Bayern Munich, it's obviously a big change. It's a big change between managers from Julian Naglesmann to Thomas Tuchel, because they both think differently. They've both got different ideas, different philosophies, that kind of thing. So it is going to be interesting to see that transition of change. But apart from that, Tuchel, a German manager, plenty of experience ever since leaving Dortmund, of course. And obviously with being with Dortmund, he has experience and knowledge of the Bundesliga inside and out. So it's not like he's coming into a completely different league. Obviously won the Champions League with Chelsea, got them through to multiple finals across the domestic board there during his time with the Blues. Obviously got to a Champions League final with PSG as well, so he has got a wealth of experience that he's built up from being away from the Bundesliga over time. And like I said, I think it might be a good opportunity for him to return. Maybe he's got some unfinished business in that league, obviously from his time at Dortmund. But this time, of course, he's taken a bit of a step up in terms of obviously joining Bayern Munich. And I guess the measuring stick and the level of success again is basically, do what you did with PSG and do what you did with PSG, but do it with this club, but do it one step further, like you did with Chelsea, if that makes sense. Get them to the Champions League final as a bare minimum, but hopefully win it like you did with Chelsea. Having that experience might help him in the long run, and it could be very incredible for him. And obviously, it might be very intriguing to see if that can happen this season. You look at Bayern's draw in the Champions League, particularly. They're in obviously the toughest half of that draw. They have Manchester City first up. Thomas Tuchel versus Pep Guardiola. And let's face it, when in England, Tuchel sort of had Pep Guardiola's number for a time. And that could be a very intriguing battle, and it might add another layer. And that, again, could be another bit of a factor as to why they brought him in. His Champions League success, his success over Guardiola in recent times. Obviously, maybe they want to kind of win the Champions League back almost immediately. Maybe that's also factored into the decision tonight to sack the original manager and go for Thomas Tuchel and go on forward in that regard. Because after Manchester City, they then have Thomas Tuchel's former club Chelsea. The narrative there writes itself pretty much. Or the more likely version, sorry Chelsea fans, but it just seems more likely that Real Madrid will progress in this competition against your lot when obviously the two teams meet in the quarterfinal, is Real Madrid. And obviously, again, a big game there. Bayern Munich versus Real Madrid pretty much sells itself. But when you add in Carlo Ancelotti versus Thomas Tuchel and all these other players that are going to be going head-to-head against each other, it makes for an even more mouth-watering encounter in the semi-final stages of the biggest cup competition in club football. So there's a lot to digest there. There's a lot of maybe things that we might not completely know the full story on. It does seem a bit strange, like I say, that they would go about the business like this. But I do think overall it's about timing. And it's about snapping them up whilst they have the opportunity to do so. And I think it is ruthless. I think it might not necessarily be the right idea. And I think that maybe sometimes the bigger picture and maybe the long-term project of a younger manager like Julian Naglesmann might have been the way to go. But I don't think he'll... I think if that is the narrative, that it was just a case of timing and maybe he needs to go away and get more experience, I don't think he'll suffer too much. He does seem like a very young and exciting manager to kind of keep your eyes on going forward, and maybe a club that is maybe in need of a bit of a rebuild might even take a shot on him and you know, maybe go for more of a long-term project. Like I say, he had built his profile up very much. He did seem like a very young, inexperienced, but somewhat exciting manager to keep your eyes on going forward. So it will be interesting to see where his career goes from here. And I'm sure there are going to be no shortage of suitors for Julian Nagelsmann going forward. But as far as Bayern goes, they've got to catch up with Dortmund at the top of the Bundesliga. They are a point behind them. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting to see if they will be able to catch them, or whether or not Dortmund will be able to outrun them, so to speak, in the run into the Bundesliga title race. And as far as the Champions League goes, Bayern may have just reinforced their manager position with a much more experienced manager, a manager who's previously won the Champions League as well as get to 2 finals in 2 consecutive years. So that could be also very interesting to see if Bayern have now got an even stronger position in this competition. But it'll be very interesting to see how this all unfolds going forward. But as I always say, those are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it at this guy. I want to know what you guys think. What do you make of the news of Thomas Tuchel becoming the new manager of Bayern Munich after Julian Naglesmann was sacked today, immediately being replaced by the German? Interesting stuff from Bayern Munich there, but I want to know what your thoughts, your comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, are on this particular topic down below in the comment section, because I'm sure they'll all make for interesting reading. Otherwise, hit that like button on the way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new and want to see more content like this. Both things are always and forever be greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch, this has been another Fletch Talks video, and I'll see you speak to you all again soon in another video.